Pioneers, it's my people. This is where I feel it's the birthplace. It really is a joining of the midwives, the ideas, the ingenuity, the creativity, the sparks of inspiration. Bioneers brings all of these visions and all of this action together.
There's nothing that's off the table here. It's all possible, and it's all connected, and it's so liberating.
Welcome to Free Speech TV. My name is Carl Nagin, and I'm here with our ongoing coverage of the 2019 Bioneers Conference. My guest is Larry Williams, and Larry is going to bring a perspective to some environmental and work justice issues that is not often at the table here at Bioneers, and I'm really eager to talk with him. He has worked with unions, and he is President Emeritus of the Progressive Workers Union, known globally. He's also known globally as the founder of unionbase.org. That's the first secure social networking platform for unions and union workers. He's going to be talking later this afternoon as part of a workshop on a just transition, workforce development, and jobs for a new, clean economy. Welcome to Free Speech TV.
Thank you.
We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I want you to start, if you wouldn't mind, by giving us some historical perspective. It's one of the historical phenomenon that I see right now is that unions just seem not to have the kind of power that they did at one point with the federal government, with our election system. I mean, go back to Roosevelt, go back to the New Deal, where they were such key players in developing policy, but that voice seems to be less powerful now. Can you give us some perspective on that?
Absolutely. I think that that's a great point. It's often lost on folks that, we talk a lot about the Green New Deal, but the original New Deal really came out of victories that were garnered by the American labor movement back then, particularly the AFL. You have the stock market crash, 25% of the population is unemployed, another 25% is underemployed, so they're working 50 to 60 hours per week, 6 hours a day, 6 days per week. And so, you have this massive unemployment that's happened, but no real mechanism to take care of that. You have Hoover as the president during those early years, but he really saw the Great Depression as a mechanism of the market and really resisted public investment in favor of, more business-minded solutions. He feared inflation. He feared prolonging the Depression by a lack of investment. It was really Roosevelt who came in and pushed for all the public works programs because of pressure from the labor movement.
Mm-hmm. So what's the picture now? One of the narratives that's out there is that the Democratic Party has lost touch with labor unions and that labor unions' power, because they are disenfranchised. Many working people feel disenfranchised.
Right.
That drew them to Trump. Is that an accurate narrative, or what are you seeing in the work you do with unions?
I think a lot of times unions play a bit of a straw man in those arguments. There are so many different types of unions and so many different types of industries. Let's just say that first of all. But a lot of times, unfortunately, when we talk about the working class, we're talking about the white working class. But the fact is that unions are more female, they're more brown, they're more diverse in general, just like the overall population. The other factor to keep in mind is that the overall union density has fallen to historic lows, and you may have to invite me back for another interview to talk about such a long subject. But going back to that subject of the New Deal, a lot of the problem here is that folks forget that what we have now in terms of Social Security, fair labor standards, National Labor Relations Act came out of that period. So we're still benefiting from gains that were won back then. Is the working class, less friendly to labor? I don't think so. I think the numbers show that 2017 was the first year that 3 out of 4 folks joining unions were under the age of 35. Things are changing. You have nonprofit organizations like mine, working for the Sierra Club. We have unionized. You have graduate students. A lot of industries are growing in terms of organizing. Media, So I think the signs are really showing that there's a growth in the labor movement, but the problem is that there's a real kind of disconnection between the anti-racist movements that exist, and there needs to be a merging of the environmental movement and the labor movement, and that's happening now as well.
Tell me about how that's happening and the work you've done to help that happen.
Oh, well, it's pretty clear that, there's been a historical, and at least in people's minds, separation between what it means to be a member of a union. But now to be a member of a union it's a holistic thing. It just doesn't stop when you leave the workplace, right? It's about your community. It's about what you can do for your family. And, you know, that kind of service model unionism has to be over because we're dealing with the rise of the alt-right and Trump, right? I think in terms of the Democrats, you know, they are really trying to, I think, show a strong push here, and they have opportunity to really show up strong. You saw all of the Democratic candidates show up at AFSCME for a debate over public sector unions, right? And that's them really saying, hey, we're here. Now, what we need them to do, though, is when they get in office to really follow through. The only candidate that I've seen so far that has really been on the picket lines is Bernie Sanders. But I also hear a lot of candidates saying, you know, very pro-labor things. You have UAW having this massive strike, which appears to may have been successful. And then you have the Chicago workers just walking out a few days ago. So there's a resurgence, and hopefully the Democrats see that and they are able to support that when they become the president.
Teachers unions as well, all over the country.
Absolutely.
Arizona. Okay, that's great. So tell me a little bit about your work with Union Base. What was that about?
Right. You know, that primarily came out of, you know, I started very young getting involved in civil rights, but I didn't know about the labor movement until I was in my early 20s, right? And when I realized that you could change your own condition, job security, health insurance, benefits, and it would be people of color with white folks and folks from other marginalized identities working together to get that victory, and that you don't get it unless they work together, I was instantly in love. Now, the problem is there's not a real penetration by the labor movement into the internet. And so
why is that?
You know, I do think there's a generational gap. I was trained by a lot of the older labor leaders, you know, working out of the Teamsters. And so I had the blessing of learning this labor history that I'm talking to you about. But I think that there's a lack of penetration of, you know, what working people have been able to accomplish. We only learn what the capitalist class has been able to do for us, right? We don't think about the victories that working people got. So what I try to do at Union Base is really make it easy to reach out to a labor leader, go online, find a union you want to talk to, we'll help you connect.
Can you describe it just as a platform? What does it look like and how does it operate?
Sure. You know, unfortunately, we got tagged as the Facebook of unions, which for those of you out there, I mean, the writer was great, but that title kind of pigeonholed us a bit.
Service.
No. Definitely not a dating service, but it's more of a secure social network, right? The idea is that a major part of the reason why the labor movement in terms of density has fallen and membership has fallen is also because employer resistance. When workers come out and say, hey, we want to follow up on our fundamental human right to join a union, they have the risk of being fired, and it takes a long time to get your job back. And how strong the NLRB depends on what the administration is running the NLRB. So our idea is that we are going to make secret conversations secure. And we've done that. We've had unions joining the site. We also have educational materials for folks who want to start a union and don't have that information. It shouldn't be a secret.
Is it a way to build coalitions among siloed unions?
Absolutely. I mean, there's some really great unions out there that have a great history, like the United Electrical Workers. Folks like that, I think it's really instinctive for them to organize and build power, but it's not necessarily automatic for every union. And remember, unions are very complicated. You know, they have international sides, they have local sides. But the one thing they all have in common is that they're pushing for the betterment of workers. And that's why we're home for the entire labor movement.
How would you like to see it build, union-based build? How would you like to see it grow?
You know, it's really funny. I feel like my dream has been coming true in the last few months, mainly because folks are starting to be less scared of something new and really embracing it as an opportunity to kind of get outside of their comfort zone. So, you know, I won't name any particular unions, but some unions that folks think of as old school are really getting outside of their comfort zone and investing time in trying to get their workers comfortable with the platform. And that's exciting, right?
What about in Silicon Valley? What kind of union action is going on out there?
Great question. Well, you know what? There's a Tech Workers Coalition. You have workers who are organizing. You know, it's really funny because, you know, you see things like contract workers who work for Google organizing, but you haven't seen workers in Google organize yet. I've been making the personal appeal to friends that I have at Uber and these companies that, hey, you know, the only way you're really going to make that change in your company is if you band together, you have a union contract, you have collective bargaining rights. I think that there's a problem where there's an instinct of kind of libertarian sentiment that exists in the tech world, but you're starting to see that change, especially since Uber workers may have the right to vote pretty soon, vote for a union pretty soon, right? Governor Newsom voted for that. And I think as you see more victories happen, it is a momentum thing, right? And hopefully we get a pro-union president to kind of hit that home.
That's terrific. So let's shift a little bit and talk about what role unions can play in dealing with some of the environmental challenges that we're facing.
Sure. I think that this revolution, what we really need is a new economy, right? And we can't get a new economy without workers having the skills to build that new economy. It's not always a direct one-to-one, and folks are, they've heard a lot of false promises, and that's a problem. But you have really great unions like the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which is already training their workers on solar work, net zero work, right? A lot of these skills, that high road labor, the only way you're going to get folks, to have that family sustaining wage is for them to have a union contract. It raises the standards of work. Now, with that said, there's a real aversion that some private companies that do solar work have to being unionized. And I think that those conversations are happening. You have some really great coalitions like the Future Energy Jobs Act in California. It's the IBEW, faith workers, returning citizen work. It's really, really a great example of how unions can come together and bring their expertise for training to build a just transition.
Can you give me some other example of model programs of job training that are being fostered within the unions themselves?
There's a really great program in California. I think that, pardon me, the name is slipping my mind right now, but basically it's a coalition of trades unions, right?
Wow.
And those trades unions have basically found a way to supply those contractors with the labor that they need. And the idea is that, if you get a job to be unionized, the skills that they need to do that job should be going into building a career over the long term instead of just a one-off, right? So I build the solar panel and now I'm jobless. You should be able to take those skills and go across the street and build the next clean energy project.
Right.
So I
Wind
think,
power, geothermal.
exactly. And the United States isn't the only place that you should look for these things. There's fights against coal plants all over the world that are translating into opportunities to build a just transition. So I think, I can actually, create a listing if that's helpful for folks of successful just transition projects. But there's coalitions like the Labor Network for Sustainability. They have, hundreds of unions across the country at the mid and lower levels of the labor movement working to build a just transition. And they're doing it from the inside of the labor movement.
That's interesting. And is that is that something you would want to incorporate in union base, that kind of information?
Absolutely. I just remember that that organization. It's the Cypress Mandela Training Facility. And they really came about because the owner of that organization saw a bridge collapse and there wasn't enough labor to fix that problem. So like I said before, when the Great Depression happened, 25% unemployment, if we're going to build this new economy, we need the workers to do it. And it needs to be sustainable work that could take us to the next generation.
Terrific. Can you talk a little bit more about the impacts of your work in the area of racial justice?
So, I think I've been a warrior for racial justice for a long time. And that's purely out of necessity, really. I think a lot of the problems that exist in Black and brown communities are very invisible. We need a holistic solution to the climate problem that doesn't treat African Americans as just a tool to be used, picked up, and put down. More specifically, if we're going to talk about this problem of inequality in this country, we have to go back to the Reconstruction. In 1935, W.B. Du Bois wrote a Black Reconstruction. He talked about how you had hundreds of thousands of Black men who were standing around idle, and there were promises that were made for labor that was supposed to come in for those folks in those communities. And the inequality we see today is a continuance of that inequality. And it's not just the Black community, it's the brown community, it's new immigrants. And so I think that the transition to a new economy, when we're talking about workers, it's not just white men, it's not just white women, it's everyone in this country. And really, that principle of all boats rise really only works if you plug the hole at the bottom, right? When the economy is in a free fall and unemployment is high, it's extremely high, almost twice as high for African Americans. So the transition needs to be led by the communities most impacted. And that's all around the country, whether Black or white.
Larry Williams, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.